achieving climate goals as we aim for transition to a low carbon and sustainable energy future. The roadmap for green hydrogen production and utilization has been established with the announcement of the National Green Hydrogen Mission in January this year. In this session, our primary focus will be on discussing the challenges and opportunities across the green hydrogen value chain, including production, transportation, market demand, and end-user adoption. The discussion will center on the need for reliable renewable energy sources, advancement in green hydrogen technologies, infrastructure development, financing requirements, and end-user adoption to establish a sustainable and efficient green hydrogen ecosystem in India. To kick off this event, I would like to invite Mr. Pavan Mulukutla to deliver the opening remarks. Mr. Pavan is the Director of Integrated Transport, Electric Mobility and Hydrogen at WRI-India. He is responsible for providing strategic direction and implementing the overarching objective of these programs. He also leads the team's development of synergic and action-oriented research programs to support India's ambitious decarbonization journey through effective, equitable, and inclusive mobility solutions. Pavan has over 2 decades of professional experience working at the intersection of urban mobility, energy, and environment. He has been at the forefront of various policy development at the national and sub-national level to improve the overall energy consumption profile of the transport sector. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Pavan to the stage with a round of applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's a very interesting conversation that we are having today. Who would have imagined last year that we'll be talking about green hydrogen specifically, right? I just thought I'll start with some thoughts, just share what's happened over the last 1 year in the ecosystem. So the National Green Hydrogen Mission was announced earlier this year in India around January, right? And then we talked about almost close to 19,000 crores of a scheme outlaid, which talks about setting up manufacturing in India on production of hydrogen. So there is a whole subsidy scheme around that. There is also an insight project which talks about 4 or 5 sectors that India will focus on, which looks at refineries, steel, fertilizer, pilot initiatives in mobility. So there are these industries where pilots will happen. And then last week, I don't know how many of you were aware, an R&D roadmap, a draft version was also released, which many organizations, I think many of you also who have contributed here, we all came together and put out this, what does really the green hydrogen roadmap look? Parallelly, as many of you are aware also that this has become a very big topic of conversation at the G20 meetings, also in the Energy Transition Working Group, where hydrogen is being seen as a vector to decarbonize hard to abate sectors, where refineries, cement, steel, and long haul mobility are becoming key focus areas of hydrogen. There are many debates going on, and I think we have a very eminent panel today to really discuss many aspects of hydrogen production, storage, distribution. But let's understand what are some of the key challenges, right? Like hydrogen is like the new blue-eyed boy, or around the new thing in the around the corner of a block, where we are talking about hydrogen as the solution for everything. And is that really going to happen? I think that's one big question that we all have in mind. We are seeing already an EV transition, and now we are here talking already about hydrogen in industrial sector dominantly. Secondly, there's also been this whole push where more than 20, one of my colleagues was just now telling more than 51 countries have announced their hydrogen strategies. And most of the G20 countries also have announced their hydrogen strategies. What are the challenges? I think 2, 3 things come to my mind. The color of the hydrogen itself is a big challenge. We all know that gray is being used, but the question is, are we talking about green? Are we talking about blue? Are we talking about yellow? Are we talking about pink? So I think that's the big debate. What color do we use and how do we really define? Is it low carbon hydrogen? I think that has been a contentious issue that's been continuously being discussed. The second is also, how do we really standardize the definition? Do we talk about cradle to gate, gate to gate, cradle to grave? I think there have been many definitions of what is the emission threshold on standardization and harmonizing. Some countries have said, we'll have 2.5 kg of CO2 emission as threshold. India has its own value. And I think that's one interesting piece of discussion on how do we even standardize what do we call as low carbon or as green carbon. Secondly, I think it will also be interesting, and I think I would also request the panel to really focus on usage of water also. If you're talking about low carbon pathways, whether using biomass or water, electrolysis for hydrogen generation, because water is also essential and used in various other sectors. So, how is it going to impact? I think those are the challenges. And then, of course, some of the critical mineral supplies, the iridium platinum series, which are used as critical minerals in the supply chain, again becomes a big issue. So, there is this many things that we need to solve. And of course, how can I forget the code standards and regulations, which is at the crux of this whole transition, specifically for hydrogen. I also see many of my colleagues, Jennifer, who is our global director of the energy program, and Melissa, who is our director of the international engagement, who are here, and we have been working very closely on this whole US India hydrogen understanding as well. So, with that, let's look forward to a very interesting panel on what it's like. Literally, I'm also looking forward to what really is going to unravel through this discussion and how do we take this forward. So, thank you, and wishing the very best for the panel discussion. Thank you.
As we have set the stage for the discussion ahead, I would like to invite Utsav Shah, Senior Program Associate at WRI India, and Jatin Saxena, Junior Program Associate at WRI India, to share WRI India's contribution to the development of a robust hydrogen value chain and the ongoing work and publication in the pipeline.
So first of all, good afternoon, and we welcome you for this having this insightful session on this green hydrogen value chain. So first, we will discuss about the what the WRI India's journey in this green hydrogen space. So here, first of all, I will just introduce about this the expert for this particular panel discussion. So there is Astha Gupta from IEA, Mr. Jagbanta from RMI, Mr. Prasanto from FTI, and the Dr. Basu from IIT Delhi. So we will be having this panel discussion after. I will just first discuss about what the WRI India has done into this green hydrogen space. So first, I will start with that. WRI India has supported Ministry of New and Renewable Energy for this developing this national green hydrogen mission. So we have facilitated various stakeholder conversation with various technology and finance experts. We have also submitted various multiple technical notes on various aspects of green hydrogen. We have also play a key role in developing this R&D roadmap for green hydrogen technologies, and also we have coordinated with various working group which is particularly empaneled for the development of regulation codes and standards, and also we are appointed as the knowledge partner for the MNRE on hydrogen for India's G20 presidency. So this is the work that we have done to support MNRE. So I'm just highlighting the main work which is currently ongoing. So there is the one crucial aspect, that is the regulation codes and standard. So what we have done is that there is already a working group appointed which cover the different aspect of the hydrogen value chain, that will cover the hydrogen production, hydrogen storage, hydrogen transport, and the end use application. So we have mapped the existing regulation codes and standards. We have identified the gaps. We have done what kind of gaps are there. We have done the analysis, and then we have recommended whether we can adopt the already available existing standard, and or alternatively we can draft some kind of amendment to the existing regulation. So that is the one part, and the second thing is the hydrogen standard. So currently there is no global consensus on hydrogen definition. So what green hydrogen holds the value. So if we are talking about the green hydrogen, the what will be the carbon intensity of this hydrogen. So there is no actually currently no global consensus on this. So this is the work that we have supported MNRE to identify the hydrogen standard. So there are various terms, that is like cradle to grave, which is also called as a well to wheel. There is a cradle to gate, which is called as a well to gate. So there are actually so many confusion among the investors, so that we have actually identified what kind of the standard which is suitable for Indian industry, and we have done with the help of consulting the various stakeholders. So this is the part that we have supported the MNRE. Now the second thing is that there is a new concept called the hydrogen hubs. So hydrogen hub, you can call it as a hydrogen hub, hydrogen valley, or hydrogen cluster. So what hydrogen hub meaning is that in hydrogen hub you will find the hydrogen production, hydrogen infrastructure, and hydrogen end user at a single place, so that there is not much transportation cost involved. So we have done the GIS analysis for identifying the hydrogen hub. So we have done the spatial data collection, then the we have done the analysis, and we provided a recommendation. So basically, if you look at this map, so in left hand side of the map there is the RE potential. So we have done analysis considering the solar and wind potential, so which are the RE rich state, and then we have identified the consumption location like refinery, ports, fertilizer, pipelines, green steel. So and combining these two, we have identified the potential location where this hub can be developed. So this is the one piece. And yeah, this is the same thing that we have identified the various location which can be the good site to have a hub. So this is the third piece that where we supported. This is the supply chain for critical minerals. So if you look at the hydrogen production, there is various components involved. There is like for electrolysis fuel cell, there will be stack, there is bipolar plate, and for everything you will require the raw minerals, process materials, subcomponents, and for that you will require the material to produce that. So we have done the assessment for this, identify this supply chain. And also for particular PEM technology, there is a platinum group materials which is very scarce in the globe. So we have also done the supply chain assessment for these minerals. Now the fourth piece is the hydrogen production. So already green hydrogen will be produced from the renewable energy, but there is another thing that hydrogen can be also produced from the biomass. And India has a good potential in surplus biomass which we can use to produce the green hydrogen. So we have done the multiple stakeholder consultation with multiple industry player to identify which technology can be the good for producing biomass, and how good it holds the potential. So we have done the multi criteria decision making methodology to assess the various technology based on this particular this dimension and criteria. So we have identified the technology dimension, economic, environmental, and social dimension, and we have also considered the different criteria like maturity, scale, reliability, resource applicability, and for the various technology like gasification, pyrolysis, and anaerobic digestion. So particularly we have tried to identify assess the technical feasibility in particularly Indian context. So these are the particular research in which WR is currently working. Now my colleague Jatin will explore about the already published or to be published research product of WRI. So I am welcoming Jatin. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Utsav, for the kind introduction. So, I will be talking about the knowledge products that WRI has recently released in collaboration with MNRE for green hydrogen production. So, there are namely three key knowledge products that WRI has announced. First is the Global Hydrogen Strategies, which is a webinar that WRI conducted in collaboration with Niti Aayog for consultation with stakeholders on various green hydrogen strategies and policies. The other two knowledge products are actually G20 reports that WRI has created in collaboration with MNRE for the G20. So first I'll talk about the global hydrogen strategies. So as Mr. Pavan has already told you that a lot of countries have already announced their green hydrogen roadmaps, like with countries like Japan announcing it way back, and countries like India and USA which have announced it recently in 2022. But the major thing is that the what is the color of hydrogen that they are going to focus on. So there, as you know, there are many colors of hydrogen that is being considered for G20, and the major color of hydrogen that is being considered is actually green and blue, that major countries are actually focusing on. Another is the sectoral adoption of these green hydrogen technologies. So the major focus of these green hydrogen technologies is actually for chemical feedstock, refining and transportation. WRI has also identified key bilateral partnerships among the G20 nations in the field of R&D partnerships, technology transfer, product trade, and demonstrations. These bilateral partnerships are critical to attain cost reduction and technological feasibility for G20 countries. These partnerships can actually accelerate the adoption of green hydrogen by focusing specific areas in R&D and thus helping the G20 countries achieve their targets. These agreements can also ensure adoption of common definitions, which is the need of the hour for the G20 nations. The next knowledge product that G20 that WRI has recently released in collaboration with MNRE is the report on acceleration the production and use of green hydrogen. In this report, we have identified three key areas where we need to work on. First is the global supply chain. In this, as we know, no one country can actually attain all the necessary components in a supply chain. So we have identified 5 key areas that are necessary for actually maintaining a supply chain. That is the raw materials of a nation, components manufacturing, technology and innovation, green hydrogen producers and their consumption and off-takers. So we need to actually make sure that all the countries are collaborating with each other, because no one country has all these 5 components with them essentially. Next key area that we have actually identified is the collaborative research and innovation. Now we need to, WRI has actually identified key focus areas for R&D collaborations. That is the hydrogen production, the electrolyzer technology, hydrogen storage and transportation, the bulk storage technologies that is needed for actually storing the hydrogen that is produced, and the end use applications. For end use applications, there are many applications that WRI has identified, that is hydrogen for heating, industrial, and fuel cell technologies that is used in the transportation sector. Now, these are the companies that are actually currently working on these collaborative research and innovation. These are some of the platforms that I have listed that we have identified that G20 nations could use for further collaborative research. Lastly, we have also identified a key area, that is the standardization of the classification of clean hydrogen. We really need to actually develop one standard for all for classifying clean hydrogen, and what we mean by that. That is the kilogram of hydrogen, the CO2 of kilogram per hydrogen that is produced, and all such that. Recently, IPHE has also introduced some guidelines as to what we could use for actually creating those guidelines, and MNRE and WRI has proposed some pathways that we could use for developing those standards in this report. So in the last knowledge product, WRI has also released another report in collaboration with MNRE for electrolyzer technology, that is titled Supporting the Energy Transition by Addressing the Technology Gaps of Electrolyzers. Now, WRI has actually projected what would be the global hydrogen demand and what would be the electrolyzer capacity that would be needed by 2050 if the global hydrogen demand keeps on increasing. The major thing that we need to focus on is the electrolyzer manufacturing. We only have 11 gigawatts of electrolyzer manufacturing globally right now, and we need to increase it exponentially if we want to achieve the 2050 target of green hydrogen that the G20 nations have set. So there are major technology gaps in electrolyzer technology, that is the supply chain constraints, intermittent supply from RE, design challenges, large-scale deployment, and of course the use of water for producing hydrogen. Lastly, WRI has also identified the key challenges and interventions needed to actually achieve this electrolyzer manufacturing. First is the technological gaps, that is the design and critical materials, that is the major challenge. For that, the WRI has actually recommended in the report that we target R&D for electrolyzers and collaborate on materials for actually developing those electrolyzers. For the policy initiatives, there is a investment risk because the investor does not understand what is green hydrogen at this point, because there is no universal standard that is there. So WRI has actually recommended that we synchronize the efforts of the industry and the government to actually relieve this investor risk. Finally, the collaboration opportunities. There is government and industry lab collaborations that could be taken for actually increasing and accelerating the adoption of green hydrogen economy for G20. Thank you. I will now hand it off to Yashaswini to carry out the.
Thank you, Utsav and Jatin, for highlighting the critical aspect of green hydrogen value chain and the initiatives WRI India is undertaking to address the challenges and drive adoption. Now it's time for the highly anticipated moderated panel discussion. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists on stage. Our first panelist is Dr. Sudha Sattva Basu. Dr. Basu is a professor at Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. His research area includes the development of energy materials and their applications to energy conversion and storage devices, including fuel cells, supercapacitors, and electrolyzers for hydrogen generation. He has published in high-impact journals, patents, and transferred technologies to various industries. Previously, he was also director of CSIR, Central Institute of Mining and Fuel Research, Dhanbad, director of CSIR Institute of Minerals and Materials Technology, Bhubaneswar, associate dean Research and Development, IIT Delhi, and former head of Chemical Engineering Department of IIT Delhi. Our next panelist this afternoon is Mr. Prashanto Roy. Mr. Prasanto Roy is a public policy, technology, and media professional. His focus area includes public policy and advocacy in technology, fintech, and new energy. He was earlier vice president at NESCOM, India's apex IT service trade association, heading its domestic market and internet and e-commerce council activities. He has worked closely with industry and government on policy, market development and growth, and other issues. Previously, he was a technology editor for 2 decades and president and chief editor at Cyber Media, India's largest technology publisher, for over 10 years. We have Mr. Jagbanta. Mr. Jagbanta is a principal at RMI-India. He is working on cutting-edge areas of climate change and energy transition in India, particularly focusing on electricity, hydrogen, and battery-related work streams. He comes from a background of energy consultancy and development. Prior to RMI India, he worked with the World Bank Group and the International Finance Corporation in the energy and climate sectors. His work covered a wide range of areas, including carbon pricing and mining, power system planning, and urban transportations. Previously, as a research associate at IHS Cambridge Energy Research Associate in Singapore, he worked extensively on nuclear, power, gas, and renewable projects in various geographies across Asia. Welcome, Mr. Jagbanta. Our next panelist for this session is Ms. Astha. Ms. Astha is a lead India analyst and coordinator at IEA. She has extensively worked in India's renewable energy sector for 8 years. Her work primarily focuses on clean energy, power sector reforms and electricity security, financing of clean energy transition, energy data, and market analysis for India. She also contributes to IEA's in-depth analysis on India and other South Asian countries. Prior to this, she worked at TERI, where her work was focused on renewable energy policy research, decentralized clean energy solution, formulating strategies for clean energy implementation, and assessing the potential of bioenergy for industrial application. Welcome, Ms. Astha. We are honored to have you all here to provide your valuable perspective in the panel discussion. This panel discussion will be focused on exploring the diverse perspective on topics such as production, transportation, market demand, and end-user adoption of green hydrogen. We are hoping to discuss the opportunities that India and global countries can leverage to enable hydrogen adoption and transition to low-carbon future. Our moderator for this panel discussion will be Anurag Nalapaneni. Anurag is a manager at WRI India. Anurag has over 8 years of experience in the renewable energy, energy storage, and green hydrogen. At WRI, he is co-leading the hydrogen program, which is focused on 4 main pillars of hydrogen value chain, that is hydrogen production, transport and storage, application including project development, and regulation codes and standards. His research across these segments is primarily focused on enabling legislative and regulatory mechanisms for accelerating technology adoption and project development along the hydrogen value chain. Please join me in welcoming our moderator and all our esteemed panelists. Over to you, Anil.
Thanks, Yashaswini, for the introduction, and thank you all our esteemed panelists for joining this session today. So I'd like to maybe kickstart with a brief an opinion of how do you think the hydrogen value chains are going to shape up. They already exist today, as we know. Grey hydrogen is already being used in a lot of industries, but energy transition being the focus for a lot of countries, hydrogen is starting to play a very important role in these conversations. So, how do you think the green hydrogen value chain is going to evolve as the ecosystem starts to establish itself? Maybe if I can start with you, Dr. Basu, and then
I will start with some contradiction that I don't think that the value chain of hydrogen exists currently in the country the way we want to like to see that. The green hydrogen value chain specifically I'm talking about. I know there's a whole lot of chloroalkali industry who produces hydrogen and chlorine and do not know how to dispose them in the sense that there is no market for them to sell chlorine and sell hydrogen. I'm talking about the chloroalkali industry in particular part of the country. The hydrogen primarily used by the petroleum refinery, they do exist a demand for that, and they make on their own the cheapest way it is possible, which is possibly from naphtha, which is possibly some cases from gas or methane or natural gas. Of course, we would like that it would have been used in steel, but it's not being used in steel industry because you required good amount of hydrogen to reduce iron oxide to iron. Syngas, which is combination of hydrogen and carbon monoxide, is being used in only one plant in India, which is of course is the first plant in Asia that uses syngas to make DRI from steel, or to make steel, or to get DRI from the iron ore, which is the JSPL plant in Anagul. That's the only plant in India and first plant in Asia that makes syngas from coal after coal gasification and use syngas for reduction of iron ore. So there's a whole, and then of course the fertilizer industry, they use hydrogen, and then of course the source is different. So I would say that there's a huge, as we talked about, as government has already chalked out a plan with a green hydrogen or hydrogen valley coming up. There is a huge potential within India itself that all these 3-4 sectors that I just mentioned, keeping away from mobility sector at this point, that there is a huge demand for hydrogen, but now we have to emphasize how this green hydrogen to be manufactured or to be produced $1 a kg or about 70-80 cents a kg, which is currently quite high. If I just remove the SMR, which is still methane reforming, which would give you about $1.2 per kg or $1.4 per kg. And if you talk about green hydrogen or blue hydrogen, it goes to from 6 to about $20 per kg, depending on which process you use and where you are situated and what is your all the raw material that is you are getting from. So this cost has to really climb down to about $1.51 per kg, and then of course everybody would start using it. And then how to reduce the cost, that is what we will all discuss, I guess, over the period of time today, that how one is the technological part, the other one is the policy, the third one is the willingness to use hydrogen. It's like a vicious circle that, how we started using IC engine car. It just, the product came to the market and no one thought in 1920s that it would become so popular. In fact, at that point of time, the petroleum industry is not grown at all. And it just, the product came in the market. It was for only for the influential people. It's not for the common man, but it slowly picked up in 1920s, 30s and 40s. And that's how you see so much of carbon is being emitted because of the use of gasoline or diesel. So it's the same way that if one starts working on it, start implementing on it, and then demand will come up and the more and more production will come. And of course, everybody says with the volume in the market, the cost will go down. That's one strategy. So these three things I think we should talk about, and we'll come up to at the end of the day or end of the session, maybe will know that how it's going to work out. But the future is bright. Although I said that I currently it is not present the way we want, but there's a huge scope, huge potential, and we have to create a base for that.
Thank you, sir, for those insights. Mr. Prashanto, if I can ask you to now comment. Professor Basu actually mentioned something really interesting about the $1 per kg mark and how currently the prices for green and blue are between $6 to $20. So, how do you think the value chain needs to sort of develop over the coming years to achieve this cost reduction and also the scale that Professor Basu was referring to?
Okay, so I think this cost gap which is there, and it's often spoken about. It's not between one and some very large figure. It's between roughly 2 and maybe 5, which is between gray and green. Now, you spoke about the value chains existing. Well, not for green hydrogen, but for hydrogen, and in that sense, green hydrogen is something a little miraculous. If you see it this way, it's like we use petrol, and imagine tomorrow if we are able to produce petrol synthetically and renewably. Okay, we are in a similar situation with hydrogen because we use an enormous amount of hydrogen and it's all gray. We use 6 million metric tons a year and growing. Okay, and about half of that goes into refineries and the other half goes into the fertilizer side, as feedstock for ammonia through SMR, etc. So that's pretty interesting. It means, and okay, what's our target for 2030? It's 5 million metric tons currently as articulated, and we've been working. India Hydrogen Alliance has been working closely with the government, with Niti Aayog, and so on, long before the green hydrogen mission actually happened. To try and arrive at some of this discussion around the targets and so on. So, if you have a target of 5 million metric tons by 2030, you already have 6 million metric tons being used. It's fairly obvious that if you're able to convert some of this to green, then you're sorted as far as the demand and the market and all that is concerned. Okay, so right now, and that is one very contentious part of this whole discussion in this national green hydrogen mission. There was a statement of intent around in an early draft for offtake mandates. It's going to be very, very crucial, and that's why in the IH2, in the India Hydrogen Alliance, we've been focused right from the beginning on demonstration scale projects, essentially getting to large hubs or hydrogen valleys. And what is that? That's essentially a large area. So one good example is we've been working with Kerala, and Kerala has I think taken a lead there and worked on frameworks for developing hydrogen hubs around Kochi and Trivandrum. uh, the idea is that you've got production, you've got offtake, you've got use, all within a certain geographical area. So it's not a dependence just on exports. Now, right now, a lot of the projects which are coming up are essentially exports focused because there is no guaranteed offtake, and without that, you don't have a bankable project. Okay, so you have a situation where we are looking at essentially exporting, and it's not just hydrogen itself is going to be very difficult to transport across thousands of kilometers. So it's usually going to be ammonia, green ammonia. Maybe there'll also be hydrogen. Green ammonia. Now we're also importing ammonia. We're importing last year, I think, about 2.5 million metric tons. In the next couple of years, we hope to be exporting 1 million metric tons of green ammonia. So you have this bit of a dichotomy there. I think the key thing to come back into this picture is that we've got an existing value chain, you've got existing storage facilities, it's all gray. So you don't have a whole bunch of it there. You don't have the electrolyzers or biomass or whichever source you want to use, because the green hydrogen standard that we are discussing, and I think in the presentation is spoken about the standard, it's left it a little open ended in terms of the source. An early draft said it would be electrolysis of water. Now it doesn't specify that, it says renewable energy to be used, etc. So it factors that in. So I think we have a great situation in terms of both an existing market of the 6 million metric tons and counting. We've got exports added to the mix. So it's very clear that it's not a solution looking for a problem. We have the problem, we have the solution. We've got to bridge the gap in terms of costs. And that's where we are hoping some of the investments will be channeled so that we are able to very quickly bridge, if not, even if you don't look at a percentage of the total 6 million metric tons, just look at a percentage of what is being imported in terms of ammonia. And it's gray ammonia, but it's being imported at tremendously variable costs. Last year, they were spending between, $400 a metric ton to some 11 and $1,200 a metric ton because of the Ukraine situation and the gas pricing. So you've got a situation where we've got all the different pieces, but they're not yet fitting together. And I think a lot of that value chain potentially exists or actually exists. We've got to just take the right steps to bring it together. And I think we can discuss a little bit more of that further down.
If I can ask Jagamanta, we've already spoken about the value chain from the perspective of production, but we have not really touched upon maybe the renewable energy requirement. This 5 million metric tons, according to the National Hydrogen Mission, they say needs anywhere between 125 to 150 gigawatts of renewable energy. So, how do you think the RE ecosystem has to sort of tie up with the green hydrogen value chain?
That's a complex question, and none of our work hasn't gone. I mean, demand assessment is one thing, but understanding how the impact it could make, because you're essentially asking RE developers to compete, providing to utilities versus providing to hydrogen production companies. Now, the trick is, of course, in terms of if I have to be a pure RE investor, and if some sort of mandates and offtake guarantee starts emerging, hydrogen essentially is a safer bet than selling it to utilities, which of course SECI, etc., there are mechanism to de-risk it. It's a relative considering beyond a point, the systems in India will not be able to absorb RE. Hydrogen as an industry, because you're essentially selling it to an industrial offtaker. There is that element of it. In the near term, I don't foresee it to be competing so much. We are also undertaking assessments on the T&D requirement for it. Now, hydrogen I would theoretically imagine 3 modes of production depending on where you are, the design of the hub, etc. You could be connected to the grid and, of course, figure out financial mechanisms and non-financial mechanisms to provide those electricity, energy banking, etc. You could be connected to the distribution grid or the transmission grid, or you could be doing it behind the meter, essentially offsite model. Now, depending on that, the kind of competition also starts emerging, right? Now, so it's not that everything is going to be on the grid. The project economics will dictate the design of those arrangements. Coastal projects potentially targeting for exports, maybe on-site renewable is better if you have the land availability, right? If you're in the hinterland trying to produce it for fertilizer production or refinery, let's say in Haryana or Uttar Pradesh, inevitably you will need to be using the national T&D infrastructure for it, which means, of course, there will be invariable impact on local peaks, invariable impact on T&D needs and congestions. Transmission is less critical, at least in the near term, because our transmission infrastructure are well built out. The distribution is where the trick is, because it's going to be pretty crowded. From an upstream investment perspective, I think there's enough scope. I don't think there's, at least in the near term, there's so much of challenge. Once, of course, we are also banking on the fact that both targets, the RE 500 gigawatt target and this humongous target, both are met. If I mean, even if you get from my perspective, if we come close to either of the target, that's already a good thing. We can think about the problem of how to manage the challenge of the sector beyond beyond that. But yeah, happy to take more question.
And finally, Astha, if you can maybe give a global perspective on how these hydrogen value chains are developing, since IEA looks at the space across the entire world. How do you see maybe the global how global value chains are developing, and how sort of India fits into the whole ecosystem?
Yeah. Thank you, Anurag. So I think globally, what is happening, I mean, India's situation is not that different. We can characterize the strategies that have been developing globally into three categories, probably where there is a section of countries which are uh, which have more demand, local demand, and therefore they are developing measures for import of hydrogen. So this could be Japan, Germany, for instance. And then there are countries like India, United States, which also have their demand, but then they have enough resource potential to also export. So then this is a mix of, they'll do a bit of import and exporters. But then there are countries like Chile and Australia, which not only which have a lot of good resource potential for low emission hydrogen, but which will really which will meet their demand, so they can definitely export. So while these can be characterized into three different buckets, but one, there are common elements to all of these strategies that have been developed and has been also pointed out by several of my fellow panelists, is that why these strategies in the first place have started developing. If you look at hydrogen sector, and it's been talked about the opening session also, 28 strategies have been announced so far globally, of which one third has been announced in the last 2 years. So you see that the reasons around announcing these strategies, of course, was the net zero pledges that the countries came up with, and also the energy security reasons due to the global energy shocks. So and then the common elements in these strategies were, one, also from their own demand that they have in the country. If there is low emission hydrogen being used in the industries of chemicals, refineries, and they would want to replace it with the low emission hydrogen. Of course, that is one of the elements that we see common across different strategies. The other one that Dr. Basu also talked about is the need to lower the cost of low emission hydrogen. That's been also seen across different strategies that came out. One of the interesting strategy element that we saw was that hydrogen was also promoted in countries where the direct use of electricity in those industries was not very feasible or cost effective. So therefore, the need for hydrogen. There have been some strategies where there is an opportunity for the countries to do industrial development. So developing your electrolyzer manufacturing, for example. So these have been overall strategies across the globe that have come out, and common elements, of course, are shared with what India is also planning to do.
Thank you, Asta, for that. Dr. Basu, if I can ask you a question, since you're in the R&D space or more closely associated to the R&D space, there's a lot of talk around electrolytic hydrogen, but there are alternative pathways as well. We are seeing seawater electrolysis being maybe slightly off electrolysis, but in the same playground. And then you have biomass-based pathways. What do you think is the future of such alternative technologies for hydrogen production? Is there scope and space for such technologies to sort of become commercial and mainstream, given that the industry is quite nascent? Or from your perspective, do you think these are still sort of moonshot projects you're looking at?
Of course, you have touched upon all the possible resources from which we can get hydrogen and the processes by which it is being made. Of course, we are concentrating on green hydrogen, so electrolysis the only way to make the green hydrogen, and the technology is quite well developed. So, of course, cost can be brought down if you think of using non PGM or non platinum group of metals. Today, many of my colleagues throughout the world are working on how to bring down the cost of an electrolyzer or cost of fuel cells. One of the primary aim is to use non-PGM catalyst, which is what I understand, including many of the companies are now using metal phosphates or phosphonates, which is a metal, could be an iron and cobalt, so which are not so costly. Cobalt, of course, there is a market demand because of the battery, but that demand would go down because cobalt will not be used in battery anymore. So, and so these are the one aspect that I'm looking at, that could bring down the cost. The membrane, which is of course monopoly of one of the company, also people are looking at it. There are processes which doesn't require membrane. Alkaline electrolyzer doesn't require membrane, so you can use that. And alkaline electrolyzer one which can use saline water or the sea water or brackish water. Of course, after some filtration to be done, the cost goes up because of that. And then, as you touched upon about the biomass and the other resources, the biomass, I would think that if I if I can bring up the biorefinery in a big way, which would happen, I'm sure in future. There's a problem of biomass is the supply chain management of the use of biomass, the quality of biomass. Even if I use algal biomass with the stacking technology, is it enough to give the refinery the amount of biomass they require uh, per day or per hour? So those are questions not being actually answered. So I can get hydrogen from biomass. The technology is there, but since the supply chain is the issue, people have not gone much forward. Um, uh, of course, vis-a-vis electrolyzer is much better in that respect, that you have enough water and of other resources that I just talked about that you require, and renewable energy, which is becoming cheaper and cheaper. Today, you can get renewable energy probably rupees two rupees per unit, and so what less if you go to industrial scale, it might become about a rupee per unit. So, so there is. These are the areas that all of us are looking at, and I'm sure that with the cost of catalyst going down, the new catalyst coming up, and then the one that I'm looking at the biomass is the co-production. Can we have a biorefinery that you produce some of the important fine chemicals or valuable chemicals along with hydrogen? Not necessarily you produce oxygen, because oxygen market, you do not have that oxygen market that you required, because if you split water, you're bound to get a stoichiometric amount of oxygen with the hydrogen, and you do not have that market of oxygen. We had, of course, 2 years back, but normally we do not have any that demand for oxygen. So if you co-produce any other fine chemicals, which is possible from biomass, not from water, then there is a value that additional value that you create along with hydrogen for the product producer, and that is what we call it electrosynthesis. That's a handful of people are working throughout the world called electrosynthesis. In fact, we have a Faraday's discussion coming up in July in Edinburgh. So uh, in all these areas, that I think that's the right approach to co-production with biorefinery, and then hydrogen cost would go down, and the technologies that we are looking at of CO2 conversion with blue hydrogen is very difficult. I mean, I could say that all of you, that for a single pass of a chemical engineer, when we look for a production of any chemicals with a single pass through a reactor, we look at conversion, simple term, the how much amount is being converted to give A to B. We look at the 60, 70, 80% conversion. For a single pass CO2 conversion to methanol, ethanol is minuscule. It's about 5%, if the best, even 2%. That is what it is. So I do not see a bright future currently with the technology that we have to be cost effective. If you want to make methanol, ethanol out of CO2, sequestration, yeah, it is possible to catch them. You want to put them in a cage, possible within a given cost that is bearable. That you want to have a $4, $5, $6 per kg hydrogen with the CO2 sequestration, we'll call it green hydrogen. But to make methanol or ethanol we are far away from it currently. And if we do a multiple pass, which of course increase the cost of energy that you use to passing these gases 10 times or 50 times to increase the conversion, then of course it's possible, but then the cost goes down. Methanol cost, ethanol cost is otherwise you will not able to match the market cost. Okay, so these are the problem which exist in the technological market.
I wanted to add something to what Professor said. All valid point. Another thing is like now you're talking about the synergies of a hub. Now, if you're trying to build a hub, and this is where the alternate sources of hydrogen starts, becoming not so much of an advantage. You're looking at something like natural gas or coal base, geographically limited. Again, CCS issues. You're looking at biomass, geographically limited supply chain issues. Second thing is transporting these feedstocks, natural gas pipelines, molecules, much costlier. Biomass, you're probably going to, I don't know the value chain, probably trucking. Like all of these adds up and probably adds up to the round trip efficiency or probably adds up to the life cycle GHG cost. Now you're looking at green hydrogen, even if let's say you're looking at the steel belt, where the argument is that you could probably theoretically produce green hydrogen or whatever low carbon hydrogen with the coal on site. If you have waived off all the necessary waivers that the policies are beginning to come out with, you could theoretically be shipping electrons from the west coast to your steel belt and construct your hubs there. So that advantage that green hydrogen provides in terms of your ability to co-locate next to demand centers, sometimes on the other sources you probably are going to flip you, and it's not going to be as easy to develop those those hubs that we are envisioning.
Yeah, just to add on to that, no disagreement with what's said, but from the standards point of view, I did mention that we have expanded the standard. I mean, the MNRE has expanded the standard to not exclude biomass essentially. Okay, so it no longer specifies electrolysis, it says produced using renewable energy. That's one. There is a fairly aggressive cap on carbon emission, the carbon intensity of 1 kg per kg. The US has an even more aggressive one for the IRA support of $3 per kilogram, which is 0.45 kilograms of carbon intensity, emission per kilogram of hydrogen produced. Water is a concern area, and in fact, I think one of the funded startups called I forget OSUS or something. OSUS, yeah. So they've been supported by DPIIT, and they've got additional funding elsewhere. They're doing some pretty good work with bioreactors, and they're of course going to places, plants where there is a reliable supply of whatever feedstock they're using for that biomass. So that is pretty interesting because water is an enormous challenge. And if you look at places where you have a lot of renewable energy, Rajasthan potentially, etc., you may not have the water. Okay, so you need to locate the plants where you actually have. Right now, of course, plant location is actually going toward ports because they're really looking at exports. Okay, but going further away, when you're looking at hubs, etc., you don't have to look at ports, but you do have to look at water. Okay, fortunately our national grid, etc., is, and we have interstate, the ISTS, so interstate transmission, etc., which is better than what it is in the US. So we are good there, but water is a challenge. So you're going to be actually limited by the local supply of water when you're using electrolysis. So the alternate pathways are interesting, important, and the startup is a great example, and there are others who are working on this page. And I know the DST has been very interested in this waste to hydrogen, waste to energy work which is there. So we really look forward. I can't predict what kind of scale there would be there, but as a percentage of this entire 5 MMT, it'll be great if we have 10% of that coming from alternative pathways.
You also raised a very interesting point around the incentives provided by the IRA on emission intensity, and you also have similar incentives by the H2 Global tender, which was announced last year. I think they also have another one coming up this year. Uh, Comparing those to the incentives being offered under India's National Hydrogen Mission, how do you think they stack up? Are they sufficient to sort of catalyze demand and create sort of a conducive environment for growth, or do you think the mission sort of falls short on providing the impetus to the industry to kickstart?
Yeah, I think it falls short at this point because you've got to just look at the numbers. If you are at there's a delta of 2 to 6 or 2 to 5.5, whatever it is, let's say about $4 per kilogram of hydrogen. And there's ammonia, which we'll come to separately. That's complicated because there's a fertilizer subsidy and all of that. It gets really complicated there. But just straight away looking at this $4, you got to really look at aggressively reducing this gap. And I mean, if you just step back, forget all this, just look at the fact that we have 6 million metric tons being consumed. Why can we not convert 5% of that to green? Okay, the answer is simply this delta in cost. Okay, and this delta in cost has to be, if it is addressable and supportable by incentives, then you're sorted in terms of, then you will not be able to supply the demand which will be there in this coming year because we don't have enough electrolyzers. So that will spur other discussions on both imports, make in India, plants being accelerated, and so on. But yes, we need more there, and the US has got a jump start on that IRA support which is there.
I just want to add this. We also raised these questions of how they give $3 per kg, from the government side, which is impossible for us to get. I mean, government cannot do that. I mean, they don't have that money. Now, US scenario is little different from the Indian scenario. In US, there's a cheap source of hydrogen existing, very cheap. Okay, whatever be the route, it need not be green hydrogen. It would be gray or brown, or I don't think blue, but gray and brown, and they're damn cheap. Okay, the gas is very cheap. If you get from gas, whichever gas maybe it is, okay, I mean, I'm talking about the shell gas or natural gas and all the sources. So that is the reason why they have given that $3 mark. For us, it is not possible. And for us, we do not have the cheap gas. So our source are going to be water and could be biomass. And of course, as he talked about, that there is a huge issue with water, and of course that needs to be, addressed. If you are going to put the electrolyzer plant in all the places, that needs to be looked into, or using of gray water, or using of brackish water wherever is available. So that's what we should look at. That's the, I mean, if we compare all the time with the US, I mean, US, I do not think there's green hydrogen is going to be implemented soon in US. Frankly speaking, as I understand all my colleagues in US, no way, no way. I go to all the conferences there, and hardly anybody is interested to talk about that. It's only about battery now, no hydrogen at all, frankly speaking.
My, I just wanted to add. I think my take is like you would. I mean, purely from domestic. If you're comparing the domestic market, I don't think we're competing. It's not. That's not that. I think the competition is in who's going to be the first one to supply to Europe or East Asia. That's essentially where, of course, that matters. What IRA is giving, what we are giving. That IRA green hydrogen is not going to come into our fertilizer plants or refinery plants. So I don't think that, and to the gentleman's point, it's a public policy decision. We don't have that much money. We need to figure out what to do with the amount of government expenditure we can provide, right? We are not the US, certainly. So from that perspective, I think we're well shielded. It's not like that IRA green hydrogen is coming into a fertilizer plant in Uttar Pradesh. We should be fine, I think. The challenge for us to make sure that the green hydrogen you're able to provide to that hinterland refinery or fertilizer plant is out competing the gray hydrogen they may be getting because of LNG, this thing, which probably is going to be pretty expensive relatively, right? So that's, I think, is the real competition. I don't think it's so much and because of the market size, there will be investment.
So I just wanted to say, in terms of demand creation, this is the place where we are lagging, because that's what even in the IEA analysis, we are actually doing an update of our global hydrogen review report, where we are looking at demand creation across different countries. Again, India, we talked about some mandates which did not come out really in the mission document, and the government of India is also saying that they are focusing on exports. So clearly, we will be competing there, and if there is not much incentive on demand creation, then we are stuck in a position as to how do we fulfill. Although the refineries themselves have targets where they are trying to develop plans for low emission hydrogen production, but yeah, clearly there's no push on the policy side on the demand creation. So that's it.
If I can continue to press you a little further on what you just raised. So the IRA actually provides that incentive on a certain kgs of CO2 per kg hydrogen produced. Now, emission intensity was something that was discussed in the presentation as well. Pawan also talked about that, and that's something that is ongoing through India's G20 presidency as well. How do you see that kind of shaping global value chains? I understand each country has its own sort of perspective, but today you're talking about, you mentioned countries which are export focused for production of hydrogen. So, how does the emission intensity sort of factor in, as each country has its own priority, but then again, they also want to sort of sell their products or sell their low cost green hydrogen to other countries? So, then how do you sort of get consensus on this emission?
Yeah, so this is a difficult task, I would say. We've done a report on towards hydrogen definitions for the G7 presidency. Getting consensus even at the G7 level was very difficult. So I would just say that currently there is no global, agreed framework on hydrogen definitions based on the emission intensity of the hydrogen supply and production, which clearly needs to be there. IPHE, like was also pointed out in the presentation, they have come up with the methodology for calculating emission intensity for different hydrogen production routes. And then international standard, the ISO standard is also being developed basis that methodology. So it is still under development and expected to come out by the end of this year or next year. So I think because it is not there, but a common methodology should be agreed in the first place, because then that will give you interoperability of regulations across different jurisdictions. It can limit market fragmentation, gives a very good signal and visibility to the investors. So I think this needs to be done. For that, international cooperation is also important. We are going to launch an international trade hydrogen forum at the Clean Energy Ministerial this year, again, where this will facilitate a dialogue between importers, exporters, to discuss the challenges in this space. So yes, this is it's going to be difficult task. And of course, this task comes along with the time scale, because this will start. You'll start production will come up, capacity is going to come up, but then if we don't define it appropriately in the right time, then just becomes a roadblock for us to move in the future.
Yes, yes.
If I can just add, so totally agree with that. And in the absence of any mechanism or any minimum standard or agreed standard, when exports are happening, it would typically be, if it's an export to Europe or to Germany, it would be a certification body, and basically their standard, which is then audited, certified, etc. Here. The danger is that if you have, I mean, for example, the US has chosen a very aggressive 0.45 kilograms per kg of, if Europe were to do that, Europe's answer to that has been CBAM, which says that if our standard is better than yours, then if you export anything, we are going to tax you. Okay, so that is dangerous, well, from our point of view, not a great direction. So we do need this agreement. And when you look at something like biomass, for example, it's not clear whether that would be acceptable, or the kind of standard which is kind of much wider, which allows for non-renewable electricity, non-electrolyzer based production, is going to be acceptable to, say, Europe. And not just for hydrogen or ammonia, but embedded products, green steel derivative products like green steel or green cement.
So I just wanted to say that again, we're coming back to colors and we're coming back to the feedstocks. So which is important, of course. Anyway, IEA has clearly said and encouraged governments to move away from colors of blue, green, gray, pink for nuclear. So we are just trying to say that if you focus on the emission intensity and also look into the additional criteria on sustainability, those factors can enable then this sort of discussion on what are the regulations existing. But if we just talk about colors and feedstocks, then this is endless discussion. So rather than coming and arriving at a common methodology would be a better way to move forward, rather than just being stuck here in this discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. Even agreeing upon something like a common methodology becomes quite challenging, as we are seeing with the conversations across nations. While India's preference could be for something like renewable hydrogen, other countries don't necessarily have to accept that. And an emission-based framework is, I think, a good way to approach it. But like you said, I think the methodology is something that needs to be agreed upon. My next question is actually to both Jagavanta and to Mr. Roy. You both mentioned about how hydrogen hubs can sort of be catalysts for enabling this transition. So, how do you think the role of a hydrogen hub is sort of going to evolve? Is it going to be just co-location of everything so that you reduce costs, or is it going to also enable the ecosystem to expand beyond existing use cases where you're trying out new applications, or also adding in sort of new use cases for the hydrogen as a hub develops? Maybe if you can just give us some your thoughts around this.
Sure. I mean, the idea for hub is, of course, to bring the ecosystem, to develop the ecosystem, bring it together. And we really believe that it's very important to have a thriving domestic ecosystem and value chain, because then, if you have, I mean, for example, the US has chosen a very aggressive 0.45 kilograms per kg of, ecosystem, and value chain, which is different from simply large exporters, which are going to be there. Um, Now, if you look at, I mean, you could argue in both directions. Now, tomorrow, if there is a 10% mandate for refineries, okay, then straight away the refineries will need captive, hydrogen. Okay, they'll need to, they already have captive gray, they'll need to convert that, etc. So their argument might be, hey, we don't really care about the hubs because we have our own captive. The idea of, what we are looking at developing, we are working with Kerala and, Tamil Nadu on, is that in that ecosystem, you do have other use cases. You have maybe smaller producers. In Kerala, you're looking at not just refineries and the fertilizer plant, but you're looking at transportation as a use case. There would be other, there are things which we are seeing very far into the distance, but they may not be. Steel is one of them. Okay, we don't have that many DRI plants, but you mentioned the JSPL plant, where incidentally they're also doing CCUS at scale. Okay, so they've some scale is there. So the hub puts this together and generates use cases beyond the obvious low hanging fruit, which is today occupying all of the 100%, all of the 6 million metric tons. Okay, you would go into transportation, smaller use case, but it would, steel, cement would be big. Depending on how the exports pick up and CBAM, etc., you're going to find that, so that's the role of a hub to, build that ecosystem and that value chain that you're talking about.
I don't have much to add. I think essentially, yeah, as Prashanta was saying, there has to be, the economics would dictate other industries to start shaping up essentially.
So this question is sort of a bit controversial, I would say, in a way. Mike, the rationale behind the question is you need anywhere between 50-55 kilowatts of electricity to produce a kg of hydrogen. Electricity costs today in India are not south of 2 rupees, no matter where you take it. And this is, I'm talking about generated costs, not even talk about landed costs. I don't think electrolyzer efficiencies are going to increase to or decrease to a point where we're looking at sub 40. Even if we assume sub 40, you're still not talking about the energy requirement for compression, for transport, for treatment, all of that aside. Given that costs of electricity are unlikely to fall, at least in the short to medium term, to under a rupee, even if you co-locate your plant, I don't think you'll achieve a cost of under a rupee. How do you think electrolytic hydrogen will achieve that $1 per kg mark?
I'll go in a different ways. I tell this also in different forum, and we have a couple of people who also actually propagate this idea that we require a drastic change here. We require all the discom should be privatized. We require that we have MBED, that CRC that talked about that there will be a smooth, whether electricity is generated in Tamil Nadu and I'm sitting in Delhi, I should be able to get the electricity from Tamil Nadu with a press on a button that we do for our mobile phone. And through CRC, this should be in a very smooth transition. That means generators, a transmission line, and the supplier and the users, they should be in sync so that I can choose any type of power I want. Of course, I believe in energy equity, and I want power from renewable energy source, which is at Karnataka, and I'm sitting in Delhi. I should be able to get it. And if these things happen, then the hydrogen use will be coming automatically. I mean, there will be more investment by all these stakeholders because you require big investment. Why? I mean, why do you not see hydrogen today? Because the investment for R&D, investment for all these hydrogen valley program are much less. We required the big investment not only for improvement in the technology, but the showcasing, and then of course creating the ecosystem and value chain. All these things require big investment, which is missing, and which would come organically from all these public private partners who are engaged in the production, distribution, transmission line. I think that's how we need to engage them. I mean, it's just not with a stick you can say that tomorrow you produce all hydrogen green. You cannot do that. So I think that's what one important part that I would like to see happening in my country.
My question to you is with or without subsidy. So that's a big question because IRA essentially you can get $1, right? But I mean, I got the question, but ultimately, of course, everyone who has been working in the hydrogen space knows that green hydrogen, two inputs, your electrolyzer and electricity, and you can't escape that math. So you need the price decline of both to happen. Now, some things are within kind of control of the government, which is where the conducive environment of the electricity markets starts coming in. The most challenging one, of course, right now is banking, which a lot of developers are asking for. But that and it goes against the discoms finances, and that's basically asking for subsidy in some form from the government indirectly. If you're gonna, and that tension of is being played out quite a bit. But electrolyzer, I guess it's then it's the scale of the market play, because manufacturers will come if there's market. Now you need to unlock the chicken and egg, and that's essentially where the role of the subsidy starts coming in, right? And creating more bankable project. If you don't have that, who would pick up that, put the money for that factory, which is going to put the electrolyzer in scale, which should drive the cost down. So you can't escape the math of it. I mean, I see your math very clearly. It's impossible, it looks right now, but ultimately those are the two inputs, and you need to figure out a way to lower that.
Yeah, I was going to say some of that. So I don't really have a different point of view there. I mean, clearly we don't know the exact math which will get us there. I think a couple of things to look at is that the technologies. I mean, RE itself. It's not a correct assumption that we have reached the pinnacle of RE efficiency. We have not. There's a long way to go, and suddenly you will have demand for capacity which is going to far exceed. I mean, India is already at, we are still at 80% thermal. So we've got a long way to go. So this capacity which is required in RE, I mean, that's going to spur a lot of innovation there. Electrolyzers, that innovation is happening. Storage is a factor, both electrical storage as well as hydrogen gas storage. So these are there. I think the other way to look at it is, if Reliance says they're going to get to $1, they said that about telecom free calls, and people said no, but then so, but being a little facetious there, but. I think it's going to happen. The question is how much of the role subsidy will play, as we just were saying.
Astha, any thoughts around that?
Dr. Basu, in general terms, that India electricity being concurrent subject, also I think there's a lot of the work that states need to do. I mean, that's very ambitious having all the discoms privatized, but at least for the states to really, and we do see a lot of momentum from the states also coming up. Clear policy regulation guidelines, directions are also, I think, equally important with what other panelists have said. So I would just
wanted to add just one thing that we've of course not talked about blue at all as a transition, and I think that aligns with the both PMO and Niti Aayog's official position, etc. But the fact is, a lot of players, Reliance included, and many other global players are looking at that as a transition. And with CCUS, so as Dr. Basu was saying, it's early days with CCUS, but if CCUS, there's innovation towards scaling it up. You have a pathway there which will let you, and even within Niti Aayog, for example, Dr. Saraswat has been a major votary of using blue as a transition, blue plus CCUS. So that is also worth looking at.
No, I'm not sure if CCUS is really being considered in the country. We've been talking to several stakeholders who are only focused on CCU. And they've been advocating that S is not going to work in India for sure. So, they are looking at several other ways to utilize the carbon capture rather than.
I believe NTPC already has a green methanol plant that they're developing.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, on the fertilizer side, you need carbon. In fact, that's why that's their current resistance to green ammonia as well. Okay, where are you going to get the CO2 from? We need that for, the urea. So, for if it's green ammonia, then you got to source the carbon from somewhere else, maybe a power plant or something like that. So, actually, the carbon utilization is very much a possibility.
I'd like to thank all our panelists. That was my final concluding question. I'd now like to open up the floor for questions if anyone has anything to ask. Oh, yes, I see a hand.
While green hydrogen is being defined across the globe, just for information, I have come to know recently that Japan has already defined it anything having emission of less than 3.4 kg of CO2 can be called green hydrogen. And one inquiry is regarding use of sewage, wastewater, seawater to address the uh, this thing, hydrogen generation in pro electrolyzers and all. What is the development? Thank you.
So if you can just repeat the last bit of your question.
Yeah, potential for use of sewage water, seawater to address the water crisis emerging in a very large manner.
So sewage water, the company that Prashanta was actually referring to, Osus Renewables, they actually use industrial effluent water, and they have these bioreactors which feed off the carbon in your effluent water, and then they're able to generate hydrogen from that. So I think maybe Dr. Basu can also elaborate on technologies which can use MSW or seawater
Yeah,
for
I think
conversion.
it's existing. The cost, of course, may not be what you are looking at, which we all talked about in our today's presentation. But there are technologies which is existing, that seawater or brackish water or the waste, sewerage water that you are talking about, and that can be in a microbial route. You can make hydrogen out of that. Those technologies are existing, but whether it's the cost that we are looking at, a $1 per kg is or not, that's the question that can be.
So just to add, seawater, of course, is used, but currently with desalination. So there is work in progress. There are pilots with electrolyzers which can directly use that seawater, because ultimately for electrolysis, you actually, I mean, salt water is a good thing, but there are other challenges with seawater in the current electrolyzers which are there. So that's there. As far as the standard is concerned, as we spoke, India has already proposed a draft standard which is 1 kg. But as I think, as an excellent presentation at the beginning, which outlined the challenges of this, it's not just saying how much of carbon intensity, but are you looking at well to, or you're looking gate to well, whatever it is, I mean, well to gate. So it's complicated. So unless you arrive at a highest common factor kind of standard which everyone agrees on, which is looking difficult, but those things are there. And as we said, the US has taken an even more aggressive approach for its IRA support.
The gentleman on the right there.
I am Manish Sharma. I'm working as a consultant. My basic question is regarding the why can't we, work through the option of blending, because the blending is the best option at this point of time, because through blending we can, reduce the, some of the emissions and basically in the hard to abate sectors, for example, in the aviation, logistics, freight, etc. And basically that can, because overnight solutions won't be possible in this case, because it may take decades and industry won't come in at one go, and industry is going to only come when it is competitive, and through blending, they will be able to have much more capacity building and much more R&D into investing and research, etc., so that it will pick step by step, and maybe after initial phase we might see some more competitive and much more capacity in that. Thanks very much.
If I may, blending is part of the government's this thing. The only thing, and it's right from what you do with refinery to fertilizer to your city gas distribution, where the pipelines for natural gas already exist. The idea is to start with a blended approach. No one's going to start unless it's a complete greenfield project on green hydrogen. No one's going to start a green hydrogen based project right now. The economics doesn't work because ultimately your end product cost will go up right now. But there is physical chemical limitations to blending, how much you can blend in existing pipeline, and that's part of the characteristic of hydrogen. So that's going to limit, and Europeans have pushed the limits to, I'm not sure, 20%, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but not much. So there is a physical limit to how much you can blend. So eventually then the question starts coming in on technology investment in pipeline storage, etc. So those are secondary questions.
Yeah, just to add, you mentioned aviation, but aviation, we don't really see blending in any form here. You've got a fuel which is liquid right now. There's sustainable aviation fuel. Hydrogen is being experimented with to power fuel cell based. So there's Universal Aviation, which is a company which has investors including Airbus, etc., which has already run ATRs and an Embraer with hydrogen powered, fuel cell powered electric motor, replacing one of the two. Engine number two was replaced with that, but not hydrogen blending directly. So in India, for example, the 6 million metric tons, it's all really feedstock. It's not really energy. So the energy use is probably starting with the city gas distribution blending, which is a possibility. But we've seen, I mean, there's ethanol blended into. So blending is challenging if the chemical characteristics are vastly different. And ethanol and petroleum is still not as different as hydrogen with a molecular weight of 1, and anything else that you choose to blend it with.
So there is, of course, I think about 10 years back, IOC come up with a high-10 with a hydrogen and methane. So it was quite, it's very, very well known and government knows it. There's also policy in hydrogen roadmap that blending will be done in all sectors. IIT Kanpur recently submitted a report on how much hydrogen can be blended with the cooking gas. So it's all coming up. It's not that nothing is happening.
Want to add, so it's not about, I'm just moving away from a topic a bit. They're also looking at biogas blending in the grid, and there, it has a lot of, I mean, purified biogas will have more methane content. So, that's also been looked at for blending in the pipelines, apart from just hydrogen.
In realizing these value chains and also in meeting these projected capacities, there are two things which need deliberate simultaneous policy level interventions as well. One is the nature of jobs, emerging jobs that therefore, and second is the skill deficit also in realizing these. Any conversations and ideas on these also would be very helpful for me.
He's referring to the skill development and the jobs that can be created through the emerging value chain for green hydrogen.
I think the mission also clearly highlights the number of jobs that can be created. So, and I think across clean energy transitions, when we talk about new technologies like offshore wind coming up or hydrogen, so these you need skilled manpower for sure for development of these projects. So I think Ministry of Skill Development is already working in consensus with the government of MNRE to see what sort of curriculum can be developed, and what sort of training would be required to make that whole transition. So I think yes, your point is very well taken. For all these new technologies, there's definitely a skill gap. Studies need to be done, and to also identify where the trainings and how they can skilling and reskilling the youth could also be important. So.
I can also just add to what Astha was mentioning. Some of these jobs will actually be transitioning from the ONG sector. If you look at hydrogen specifically, the ONG sector has been using hydrogen for quite some time. So has the fertilizer sector. Essentially, they don't care where the molecule comes from. They just need the molecule. They know how to use the molecule. So yes, renewable energy transition based roles will have to be sort of developed and upskilled. But specifically, if you're looking at the hydrogen value chain, some of those roles already do exist. So they sort of maybe have to adapt or evolve to the source of production at the most. But yes, there's a huge, there is going to be a huge requirement for skilling and understanding how this energy transition is going to impact jobs as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just totally agree with you that this is not going to be as disruptive in terms of displacing a lot of existing jobs. There's a lot of potential. There will possibly be displacement in the coal sector and maybe retraining, etc., as possible. Versus, let's take the EV sector, for example. There is going to be a impact on the servicing industry because the way EVs are serviced is completely different. So that's dramatic. This is not, it's more of a gradient or a transition, but it opens up opportunities for a lot of new jobs.
We can take
one point I just wanted to mention, which I think we not touched upon, which also I think it's very important, is about the urban mining, the resources that we require. As India as a country is a huge population, and we require big resources. And even the hydrogen and fuel cells and all these areas that we're talking about, the rare earth element that goes into, or platinum group of metal that goes into making electrolyzer. I think we should look at it how we can, um, sourcing done actually through urban mining means that the secondary resources that used electrolyzer should be able to, you reclaim or claim your minerals or metals or everything not even a single. It should not be thrown away and get back everything. And that's how very important for us, because we do not have that resources cater to 1.4 billion population. For that, each and every material that we have here need to be recycled, which we need to do it for ourselves. Otherwise, no one going to give you the crucial mineral when you require it. That's important.
I think that's a very valid point, Dr. We might have missed that during our conversation, but yeah, due to lack of
Another
time.
thing, Dr. Basu, I have a question in mind. Everywhere throughout the globe, they are concerned about the safety of hydrogen handling, transportation, etc. I don't understand. It is already established.
Safety issues. It's colorless, it's odorless, it spreads extremely fast, it's extremely light. Unlike cooking gas. Right now we have very minimal use in the energy as an energy source. So as we move, and it cannot be stored in existing material containers. So there's specially lined containers and so on. So clearly, as we go forward to scale in terms of, let's say, hydrogen refueling stations, etc., you will need an infrastructure, a set of safety. The standards are there, but you will need to deploy them at let's say the level of attention that will need to be paid to this will be significantly more than what has been paid for the limited hydrogen use on the industrial side. I don't think we've deployed it at scale. That's all. We've not used hydrogen at scale for whether it's for powering vehicles or anything else. So yeah, it's not. Yeah, the public awareness. Everyone's used to most hazardous chemicals or hazmats being either corrosive or there's a strong odor or something. Hydrogen is completely different, and we've seen the catastrophic incidents with the Challenger space shuttle, etc. Those were caused by hydrogen.
All right, thank you everyone for the questions, and I'd like to thank the panelists. It was really insightful. Thank you for bearing with my last not so easy question to answer. But once again, I thank you everyone for attending the session. It was really great to interact with all of you as well as the questions. Hope we all had something to learn from today's session.
Yeah, thank you everyone. And sincere gratitude to all our panelists and moderator for the valuable discussion on the challenges in the green hydrogen value chain. I would like to thank all the attendees for the active participation and all your questions. Your presence has contributed to the success of this event. Finally, a special thanks to the organizing team and everyone who has worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make this conference possible. We hope the knowledge shared here and ideas exchanged here today will pave the way for a greener and more sustainable future. Let us continue our efforts to fast-track the green hydrogen value chain in India and beyond.